Now let's talk about cable management. So the cable that you're going to see in like 99% of your stuff is going to be XLR cables. And when you are going to buy them, sometimes it can be confusing of like, how is an XLR cable $50 versus this one is $10? In general, the quality of the cable for audio, like reproducing audio, is going to be roughly the same. Like XLR cables themselves are pretty simple, so there's not a lot to make premium out of them. What you're really playing for is the build quality. So things like the solder points inside the cable, like near the connectors. More expensive cables are going to have better soldering. Um, they may have better sleeves around the outside of the cable. They may have other things that are nicer. So that's really what you're paying for. So things like your wireless mics, which maybe you're unplugging at the beginning of the season and then never touching them again, unplugging and plugging back in. Those you could potentially get away with cheaper cables because they're not really moving around a lot. They're not getting abused. Whereas your cables for like your wired soloist mics or your marimbas, those are getting pulled and pushed a lot, and unplugged and replugged a lot. So those are worth spending a little bit more money to get nicer cables. You don't have to spend a ton of money on them. Just don't get the cheap ones. So just the nuance there. There are some cables that are overpriced. You're not getting that much more quality out of them. So just things to keep in mind. Longer cables are obviously going to be more expensive, but longer cables are not necessarily better. Buy the amount of cable that you need to cover the distance and then just a little bit of extra. So, for example, your marimba, you don't need a 25-foot cable for your marimba. That's a lot of extra cable, which is more opportunities for it to get hung on things, more opportunities for it to get stuck, and it's more cable for the students to wrap if they need to rewrap them. So try to measure out your equipment and measure kind of where your cable's running. You can even grab a string and like run it across your instrument and where you plan the cable to go, and buy the cable that's that size or just a little bit bigger rather than going full out. So just things to keep in mind to help keep things clean. Like inside of the mixer cart, and I'll show you that in a second. We use like 2-foot, 3-foot cables for everything. So no need to have a 10-foot cable inside the mixer cart. Just buy a short one. And then what you'll see a lot is snakes, and there are multiple kinds of snakes. There are traditional XLR snakes. This is like just a normal box that you've probably seen on the floor. You plug the XLR cable into it, and then in the mixer, it's all 8 XLR cables that connect into the back of the mixer. So that is one kind of snake. Then there is a mod snake. This has like a an old printer like serial connector is what it looks like, and you can merge cables together and kind of reduce them down to a smaller cable. That was or is a popular way to do it, but it's kind of the older method. The newer way is Ethercon. So Ethercon snakes use an Ethernet cord that's made to look like the XLR cable. So Ethercon snakes are kind of the more modern option. And then stage boxes you'll see connected in as well. This is like a snake, but this typically is like paired with the Ethercon or mod snake. So just those are available to you. If you're thinking ahead to things that are easier, the Ethercon is going to be the easiest, right? Because it's one cable that runs from your mixer. So you plug it in one spot on your mixer, and then you plug it in one spot on the stage box or the snake. Whereas your traditional XLR snake, if you have 16 channels, that's a really big cable because it has to run 16 cables through it, and you have to plug in all 16 on the back of the mixer. And if it breaks, then you have to replace the whole thing, right? So whereas an Ethercon, if the cable breaks, that cable is really easy to replace. So thinking to snakes, traditional XLR snakes are going to be a little bit cheaper, but Ethercon's probably cheaper in the long run and a little bit easier to work with too. Some things that are going to be your best friends if you do not already have them. One, planning in advance. So before you ever start running cable or like zip tying things or plugging things in, plan it out. And I'll show you a setup sheet on the next slide, but plan out what you're going to do. And then with that, keep your cabling consistent. So if you always do it one way, do it the same way on every instrument unless you have a reason not to. That just helps with troubleshooting, and it helps with, one, just making it look nice and replacing cables. All that's easier when you're consistent rather than being random and chaos with it. Your item best friends are going to be zip ties and Velcro ties. So have tons of zip ties and Velcro ties. I promise you can't have too many. They're not expensive, so just have them. They're nice to have. Electrical tape. This is a trick that somebody showed me a couple of years ago. buy electrical tape in as many colors as you can, because then you can tie that on each end of the XLR cable. And even if you're running a cable, like 4 or 5 cables together to the snake, now you can remember, oh, this is the white one that was connected to the other end of the white cable, which is connected to the mic, which is colored white. So it makes it easier to troubleshoot if each thing has its own color, or if there's a color system at least to build off of. Velcro straps, again, I'll show you this in a second, but Velcro straps to hold cables. So this isn't like the Velcro ties that are like zip ties. These are Velcro straps. They're bigger, and you can hook the rest of your leftover cable on them and keep them nice and easy to access. Appropriately sized cables, we just talked about that. So don't get a 25-foot cable for something that a 10-foot cable can do. 1, you're spending too much money, and 2, you're just making it more work to keep up with later. And don't be afraid of daisy chaining. You can plug 2 XLR cables into each other and they will still work. Don't be afraid of daisy chaining. So here is our setup for this year, and we are a smaller group, so there's not as many instruments, but we have a sample pad, which was attached to this marimba, and we had left and right audio coming out, this black and gray, and this ran across the frame and dropped over here at the end of the marimba, and this marimba had 2 mics, so red and orange. So we have 4 channels from here, which plugged into our 8-channel snake. On the other side here, we had this marimba, so we had yellow and green, so yellow, green, and then blue, indigo. This vibraphone plugged into the end of the marimba, which again you'll see in a second, and all 4 of these plugged into the 8-channel snake. This snake is plugged into the mixer, and then our wired and wireless mics also plug directly into the mixer. So this was a rough setup, and the thing that I would say is have a plan. So again, plan this out so you know what cables you need and where they're going, but also plan out, assuming you're going to take advantage of the Velcro trick, and plan out what color those channels are going to be. We have a system that I picked up on when I learned about the multicolored tape, which is just to use the rainbow. So the colors going across here are Roy G. Biv. So red, orange, yellow, green, and then blue, no indigo, so violet. But having that system makes it easy, one, for us to troubleshoot. We know it's rainbow from left to right. We can talk to the students about it so they understand how to troubleshoot it as well and know exactly where things go in case something gets unplugged. But all that plugs in, so when we roll out onto the field, this snake we just pull out, and then all the students plug directly into that. So next, I want to walk you through exactly what we're doing on our instruments so you can see what that looks like, you can see where things are placed, and you can see what I mean by daisy chaining them and running the cables into the snake. So here is the basic setup. This is like half of our setup. So we have 2 mallet instruments in the mixer, and then we'll have one of our soloist mics so you can kind of see the full thing. So as you're looking, you can kind of look for cables down across the bottom of the frames. So we have those nice and tight, and we'll see those up close in a second. But I just wanted to give you kind of a overview so you could see like distance of mics from the mallets or how the cables are running, and then we'll look at that more closely here in a second. So we'll start over on the far side of the setup with our vibraphone. So our basic mic setup, we'll stick with this one, is we have this clamp on the frame, this boom arm that's not really adjustable. I actually found these that it has, hopefully you can see that, it's like teeth to connect in, so you don't have to worry about, if you ever use mic stands, they get wobbly and they get loose. In theory, this is mechanical entirely, so I don't have to worry about that getting loose, and it stayed pretty well throughout the season without us having to come back and adjust it. The only point where we had some of that problem was up here, but that's just the nature of kind of having those arms that can bend. But anyway, so we're running this boom arm into a shock mount, and that is to help prevent any of the noise from the cymbals as they're doing cymbal rolls while they're playing. So this allows it to move around and not take that sound into the microphone, using a dynamic microphone and a windscreen. So windscreen, super helpful. I know it's kind of an obvious thing, but we didn't use it for a while, and this year it really helped with cleaning up the sound. Mic plugged in, color-coded, and it wraps around the frame. This just gives us some flexibility, so as things are being transported, it's not loose. I actually do want it to move around because that means that we're helping protect this cable. So I do want it to be a little bit loose here because it's firm over here. And using tons of zip ties, but really just using a zip tie anytime something's changing. So now that this cable is down on the frame, we zip tie it to the frame,
and when it comes further up the frame and it's about to change position again, we zip tie it again. And you can see it's the same basic setup on the other mic we have over here. So set up here, cable, zip tied, and then these zip ties happen again here. This is when the cables are merged, and you'll see a better shot of that when we move over to the marimba. So that's the basic setup. On this one, this is on like a B flat or so, just based on our show music, kind of where it made sense and where it made sense on the instrument. This one is on roughly an F, C area, somewhere in that region. So these cables come all the way out to the edge of the instrument, and zip ties up here so that it's stuck to that. And we have these Velcro straps. This is where the rest of the cable sits. So in an ideal world, we would go back and replace these cables with shorter cables. This is a lot of extra slack. It's just creating more opportunities for the cable to break. But we can tie it up here to the Velcro strap and it works out okay. And you can see our color coding carries over to here. So we have our purple mic and our blue mic. Keeps it very clear of which one we're replacing, which cable we need to replace, and which mic it goes to. So it helps with troubleshooting a lot. When this student rolls up, their sole job is to come and connect the cables to their partner, which has 2 more cables on their frame, which run all the way down their instrument. So they never plug into a snake. They never plug into the mixer directly. They're just plugging into these cables, which we'll talk more about as we go to the other side. So just so you have that idea, again, more of the Velcro strap, more of the zip ties. Don't be afraid of zip ties. Use them, plentiful. Something too you can do is if you're ever needing to replace a cable or add a cable, put the zip tie on your new setup before you cut the old zip tie off. Just a quick thing to help. So again, zip ties coming down the frame. And you can see this cable's on the other side of the frame. It was a goof when we were setting up that I just didn't feel like fixing at the moment. But it gives us a good view now. So same setup here. We have a clamp, the boom arm, microphone, color coded. Notice different color. Now, if you have a big setup, then you may not be able to do a different color for every mic, but fortunately, we're relatively small, which does allow us to do that. Again, cable coming down, zip tie here. You can see now we have our 3 cables together. So 1, 2, 3. So these are from the other instrument and from our current instrument. Coming across, another mic, different color, zip tie, and then now we have all 4 cables together. These cables run all the way to the end of the instrument. And then we have 4 different cables over here. So this student's job ends up that these 4 cables need to be plugged into the snake that we have down here. And again, it's color coded. So they just grab the green one, plug it into the green. Right, so these colors really help with the troubleshooting process. And then these other 4 would come from the other side of the setup. So that's the basic mallet setup to catch marimba mics again. So this one's at roughly an F on the keyboard, and I believe the other one is roughly around B flat. So the snake plugs into our mixer. So we kind of consolidated our setup this year since we had a little bit less gear. So it's kind of tight in here. So hopefully you can see in the dark. But using the snake helps everything stays plugged in all the time, so you don't have to worry about reaching in here and plugging in, especially if 1, it's hard to see, but 2, if anything is potentially breaking, it's going to be the snake, not the mixer. The snake is a lot easier and cheaper to replace than the mixer, so we want to avoid plugging in and out of the mixer as much as possible. So to look at a soloist mic while we're here, so same thing, color-coded, giving some slack for the cable, so very intentionally tying the top of this so that this can't get pulled down like this, right? And then the cable attached to the mic stand with our Velcro strap and the mic cable here. So whoever is carrying this on the field can carry this whole setup, place it where it needs to go, unvelcro this, and then run it over where it needs to be plugged in. So keeping the cable with the mic, with the instrument, again, just helps with troubleshooting and being consistent with the setup. So this is color-coded yellow, and just like our snake, we have a cable here that is yellow, so this mic goes into this cable. We had a second mic this year, so green is the other mic. 2 more cables coming from the mixer. These are black and white. These are for our speakers. So the system that we used that kind of picked up was white is right, so this is the right speaker, and then this black one would become the other speaker. And these are here, easy to plug in once we have the speaker cables coming this direction. The reason we have these 4 cables hanging out here is, again, it's cheaper to replace this like 2-foot cable than it is to replace the mixer when we're unplugging and replugging a lot like we do with anything marching arts related. So these are just like 2-foot, 3-foot cables that are running straight from the mixer to right here. Makes it easier to get to and easy to replace if we need to. The only other thing on the setup that's worthwhile to note is we have our wireless microphone here, and this is just running through the side and then plugged in, so it's always plugged in. Trying to think that covers kind of the main things that you would be interested in knowing. Router, like the wireless router, it's coming up from here and then it's up top. But other than that, everything's pretty straightforward. The goal is to be able to unplug and replug as few things as possible and make it foolproof so that anybody that walks up that needs to know how to set it up can set it up, just so that you can give extra hands. So like the mic being all together, I can just tell them plug yellow into yellow and they can know exactly what that means. So that's the basic walkthrough of the setup.